Give me the high sign there, James. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, here we are with Bible Basics. We are on Lesson 9, the 6th Commandment. And we hope to get 3 commandments done today. 7th and 8th also on top of the 6th, if the 6th doesn't drag us down. We hope not. But it might. It has a tendency to do that at times. So, without further ado, let us proceed. We have a number of passages there that speak to the topic of the 6th commandment, which is marriage and sex, and I guess you could say human relationships and so. And you have Genesis and a couple of Matthews, 1 Corinthians, Ephesians, 2 of those, and 2 Timothy. So we'll start with Genesis. Who would like to read that for us? Mr. Kirk, please.
And the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him."
All right. So the very first thing that we note is that God is again setting up this relationship. God is the creator of all things, but creator doesn't always simply mean that he makes something out of nothing. Sometimes creator means that he fashions institutions, organizations, relationships, human interaction, things like that. And so the key word you want to look for in this passage is helper. And then depending on the Bible translation you're looking at, you'll go to find a number of different terms. I like the term suitable, but you can also say corresponding to. You could also say something like fit together. That's the actual Hebrew thinking here, or meaning here. Fit together. And if we think of the sexual parts, obviously there's a real clear understanding there what fits into what and whom and so on and so forth. And so that's what we mean when we talk about corresponding, that they fit, that they complement one another, etc. That in God's terminology, you can't fulfill completely, you can't accomplish completely the relationship with just one side. It's not the way it's made, created. Okay. Next passage, Matthew 5:28. Go ahead.
But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart.
Okay. So lust doesn't have to, but it can equal adultery, right? And we're going to come to that meaning of adultery in a minute. Matthew 19. Sorry. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Matthew 19:6. For they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate.
Okay. The key word, believe it or not, there is let. Okay? In other words, here we're talking about something that man does that God does not want. So God has put the marriage together regardless of what we might think. It's like when we're talking about what happens in the world, and which we'll talk a lot about tomorrow. It came up in the Tuesday class, and we're going to go through it more detail in the Sunday class tomorrow. God permits, God allows, God causes, it's all God's doing. The same thing is with marriage. We can look at marriage and we can say that was a big mistake, humanly speaking. But any marriage that is a marriage, which we'll come to the definition in a little bit here, is God's duty. Even if it is, say, arranged, if it is spur of the moment, shall we say, in the heat of passion, anything like that, when we might look at that, we might say, well, that doesn't count. Well, yeah, it does count. If, in a minute, we'll see if it fits the definition of marriage, then it counts. And it really doesn't matter any other purpose. God has brought that together, and God intends that to be separate. But man he is capable of, just like he's capable of doing all kinds of wickedness and evil, man is capable of doing something that God does not want. 1 Corinthians 6:19. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have from God, and that you are not your own?
Okay. So the point of that entire passage is that we belong to God, okay, as individuals, and God decides what we do with our bodies. And therefore, when it comes to rights, we do not have the right to join ourselves outside of marriage in a sexual way. We do not have the right to use prostitutes. This is not talking right now about polygamy or bigamy or anything like that. This is talking about illicit sexual relations. We do not have the right to that. Right? Now that, again, does not mean that government can't come along and tell us, yeah, okay, you have the right to do that. Prostitution is legal in a lot of places in the world. And that's the government's business. But Paul is saying here that our bodies belong to us. Yes, ma'am?
Hannah had a question back to the other last reading about marriage and I did.
Go ahead.
So because there's marriage that is not like God is God, is not valid? Like one of those.
No, he doesn't say that. No, that's not true. God brings them together, but God, let's put it this way. Again, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but the first question on the definition of marriage, which we're building right now, the first question there, whatever fits that definition, whether God's part of it or not. Okay, so it doesn't really matter whether God's part of it or not. If you get married by justice of peace, or numerous other ways that we'll talk about in a minute. It doesn't matter. Still, God is the one who's brought you together. Again, whether we think so or not. You know, you use this program on TV, for example. I've seen numerous advertisements for it. You know, Married at First Sight. I don't never watched it. I don't know, but from the commercials, it looks like you get two people who don't know anything about each other, and you marry them in a marriage ceremony to see what happens. Which is kind of a frivolous use of marriage, frankly. But it would be a biblical marriage. Again, I haven't watched it, so I don't know what kind of vows are involved or promises are involved or whatever. But if it again meets the definition, then that would be true. Ephesians 5.
I have that.
Okay.
22 and 23. Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body.
Okay. So, that's pretty clear, isn't it? I mean, that's pretty unmistakable. There's not a lot to argue about there. Subject as to the Lord. In other words, subject to the husband in the same way that you're subject to God. Ooh. You know? And I know a lot of husbands think they're God, but it doesn't come from that passage. Okay. The next passage in Ephesians 5:25. Yes, ma'am.
Right. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her.
All right. What kind of love? Self-sacrificing love. And it's very interesting that the Bible does not use the same term for wives. The Bible does not expect nor command that wives give their lives, their blood, if you will, their being, their living to husbands, but it does command that husbands give their very lives to their wives, which is very interesting. So people who say, well, it's unequal, it's not fair, that God says wives should be subject to husbands, that's not fair. Well, then if that's true, then it's not fair that husbands are commanded to love their wives as Christ loved the world and gave himself up for it. So you want to talk about fairness, folks. Which has the higher command? The wives or the husbands? Yeah, the husbands have far the more dutiful, responsible, all-inclusive command than the wives do. So if you want to talk about fairness, the Bible is very unfair to husbands, more so than to wives. Very much so. 2 Timothy passage. Go ahead, Carolyn. Oh no, Richard has. Go ahead, Richard.
Now flee from mutual lust and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart.
Okay, and again, run away from that lust. Okay? Flee from it. Don't involve yourself with it so that it leads to further problems like actual adultery and so on and so forth. So, based on this, as the Genesis passage showed, and as Jesus himself showed, there are two main points to a biblical marriage. Okay? Think about what those would be that we've heard directly from God. 2 points. What's one? And they're not in any particular order.
Man and a woman.
Well, that's given.
Together for life.
All right,
Well, today it's like it.
yeah, I guess that's not given today, is it? Okay, so we're talking about that.
Okay.
So underneath that, 1 and 2.
Together for life.
Okay. For life. Okay, that is again God's intention. In the original plan before the fall into sin, it was for life. And that includes these things here. So that includes the headship, the subjection, and it also includes the giving totally. All right, what's the second thing?
Mutual commitment.
Yeah, a mutual commitment. Eve was brought to Adam, and Adam said, "Okay, this looks good to me. I'll accept this." All right, and in many other examples down through the scriptures, that is a given. Even in arranged marriages, the woman and the man agree to have the arrangement or to go along with the arrangement. So what the theologians call mutual consent. Okay? So for life, mutual consent, folks, that is it. There is no other biblical definition for marriage. Not the church, nor the state defines marriage biblically. Only the Bible defines this union. For life and mutual consent. Period. The ramifications of that, of course, are quite large. Now, when it comes to the state claims the right, although it's not given to them by God, but it claims the right to manage, to order, if you will, to give guidelines for, and so on and so forth, for marriage. It has no right to do that, but it takes that right, just like it takes the right in a lot of things. And according to Romans 13, in normal cases, in regular life, we have to follow the rules of the state. But the rules of the state change constantly. And so sometimes it's kind of hard to keep up with them all. But that is the definition. And when we talk about some of these other things, we'll go back to this definition again and again and again and again and again and again. So, what are the blessings of marriage? Yes, ma'am.
Companionship?
Okay, yeah, I call these the 3 C's. The 3 C's. C number 1. And this does make a difference, by the way, in order. Because this is the first thing that God said. It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. That is by God's own direction. Before he said anything else about any other blessings, he said, it's not good for the man to be alone. He didn't say, oh gee, it's not good for the man to be horny. He didn't say that. He didn't say that. He didn't. God, he didn't. He said it's not good for the man to be alone. Okay? Right? So, secondly, children. Be fruitful and multiply. And fill the earth. Have as many children as you can have. Now, of course, that is a bit of a, I'll get to you in a second here, that is a bit of a subjective judgment. Right? Some women can have more children than others. Some women are prone to miscarriage. Some women find it very difficult to become pregnant in the first place. Some women can't handle a passel of kids emotionally and mentally, right? Or physically. It can happen the doctor can say, okay, that's number 4, I'm going to cut you off. Because it's just, you're 4'10" and you weigh 90 pounds soaking wet, and these pregnancies are killing. Okay? That is very possible. In which case, it's kind of, God designed that particular woman that way, and so it's out of her hands. Okay? So there's all kinds of things that come into that when we say as many as possible. Hannah, question?
So, if it's one of the main things hard to do, then why can't? Like, there are a lot of women who can't have kids, like, they're unable to have kids. And there are a lot of men that can't have kids, so why does he have it that way?
Why does he have it that way? Well, that's the same question you can ask about why is there war, or why do people fall dead of heart attacks? Again, God designed, the original creation design was for these 2 things to work in conjunction with one another and to work perfectly. That was the idea. Who knows how many children Eve really had? I mean, if Adam lived to be 930 some odd years old, how old is Eve? We don't know. But let's just guess that as women outlive men anyway, let's just assume that Eve lived into her thousands. Are we going to say that she was limited to 3 children, Cain, Abel, and Shem, or Seth? No, Seth. Yeah. No, I don't think so. Obviously, they had to have daughters because Cain had to have somebody to run off with, and Seth had to have somebody to bear children for him. So obviously, Adam and Eve had a lot of children. Now, most theologians have surmised, and again, that's all it is to guess. Most theologians have surmised that because of their long lives, that women could produce children all the way up into their 500s and 600s. Okay, and so just for sake of argument, if you want to take, I want to say, well, a child every, let's say 3 years instead of 1 or 2. Let's say 3 years. Then what we got? We've got 300 children. And so it's very possible that Adam and Eve could have had 300 children. But they were designed to have 300 children. The fall not only shrunk our lifespan, but the fall also shrunk all of our physical capabilities. Our strength, our endurance, our ability to have children, our ability to father children, and so on and so forth. And so, just because this is the way it was designed doesn't mean this is the way it stays. But God designed it that way. That's the original designation or the original institution. That's the way it was designed. And I mean, think about, when you think of for life, sometimes, all the time we talk about how many children they could have had, but think about for life and living with your spouse for 900 years or 1,000 years, right? I mean, right? My wife and I are getting very close to 50 years together. Matter of fact, next week it'll be 50 years next week, frankly, it's good to have 2 floors to the house. Comes in handy at times after 50 years. So, that's the answer to the question. Now, there is a third C because of the fall. And so I'm going to put a little dotted line here. And this third C comes only because of the fall into sin. Anybody? Chastity, right. This is not Cher's daughter. This is the real McCoy. In other words, to combat the lust that we listed before, okay? To combat the lust. And if you read 1 Corinthians chapter 7, especially the first 10 verses or so, you get a real clear idea. Matter of fact, let's do that. Let's just do that because I think it's important to hear that now and then. So 1 Corinthians chapter 7. I should maybe put that on my list, and I didn't do it. Like I said, as I went on, the number of passages got longer and longer and longer, and I'm a little worried about that. So, will you guys just follow along? I'll go ahead and read it. So, we're on page 1788 and 1789. 1788 and 1789. Now, concerning the things about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Now, they were asking him about whether it's good for a pastor to be married. And in general, Paul is giving the advice, and he comes back to this point a couple of times. He basically says, if you've got a wife and family to take care of, you're probably not going to be able to put as much time, obviously, as much time into your ministry as you would otherwise. Without a relationship. That's a given. Okay? And a lot of pastors' marriages are a mess because of it, one way or another. But then he goes on and make a more general statement. Because of immoralities, and then we know it's general because why? Because the Greek construction here puts each man, that comes first in the Greek. So each man is to have his own wife, and each husband to have her own husband. So, as far as pastors go, sure, yeah. It's good that you can live a celibate life and devote all your energies 100% to that. But in general, it's better that everybody have their own spouse. The husband must fulfill his duty to his wife, and likewise also the wife to her husband. And the Greeks understood this very clearly to mean sex. They very clearly understood this. This was not a question for them when Paul spoke of duty. Now, I know that probably sounds a little off-putting to us today, that we think of sexual intercourse as duty. But you have to understand that Paul is dealing with people who have fallen into sin. And therefore, not only lust is going to be a problem, but disinterest is going to be a problem. And arguments, if you will, disagreements of various kinds are going to be a problem. And so knowing that we have the fall to deal with, he kind of refers back to this and says, let's remember what the original intention was. And the original intention was for this to be a very normal, very natural, very regular kind of thing. Okay? The wife does not have authority over her own body. There's the argument against the pro-choicers right there from the Bible. As far as the Bible is concerned, it's very clear. I don't see how churches get around this. They may not, churches will talk a lot about, well, the Bible is unclear about the beginning of life, which it's not. But the Bible is extremely clear on this point. And for husbands or fathers, even if they're not husbands, to not have any say, as in many states they don't, over the life of the unborn is just wrong. And it's definitely wrong scripturally. And yet, the vast majority of Protestant churches in the country, they don't pay any attention to it. Likewise, also, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. And now, then Paul says something that might shock our ears a little bit. Stop depriving one another. So he's pretty strong on this point. This is not a, well, your opinion or whatever. No, this is a very strong statement. This is the imperative in the Greek. Okay? Stop. Obviously, there was this problem in Corinth, and we kind of know what it is from other sources, that the problem was that people began to think, and this came very early on in the church, people began to think of physicality, especially sexual physicality, as unholy, or as somehow sordid. You can even use the word dirty. And I think the reason, well, I know the reason. The reason was because it is obviously a very passionate time. It is a time of unleashing, if you will. And the people who wanted to think of themselves as holy, wanted to think of themselves as spiritual, they kind of said, well, that's kind of sordid, that's just physical. And anybody who's been married knows that is not just physical. If it's just physical, you're in a bad relationship. So this is why Paul had to do this, because congregations were already getting to the point where they were starting to think of chastity as being celibacy, when it's not. The two do not mean the same thing. But celibacy was rearing its ugly head already in the early church, and Paul wanted to stop it. Unfortunately, they did not listen to him. So that you may devote, except by agreement for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer and come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I say this by way of concession, not of command. So the command part has to do with the fact that you are not commanded to take a break, and you are not commanded to take a break only for prayer. He just uses that as an example. But the command is still there. Don't get them wrong here. The command is still there. Don't or stop depriving yourself. That's the command. The rest of it has to do with how this is worked out. That's not a command. You work it out any way you want to. All right. If you want to take a month off or 2 months or 4 months or whatever, for whatever reason you want, whether it's a health reason or whether it's some other reason, a spiritual reason, fine. But he's saying that has to be, again, notice that the both are involved here. Okay, so it has to be by mutual consent. The rest of it has to do back again with pastors and stuff like that. So the 3 C's, you can put those down as the blessings of prayer. What is adultery? What is adultery? According to what we have learned so far as the will of God. Well, okay, good. I'm glad you said that. That will help us. Okay. So adultery is lust. Lust for what? Other than your spouse.
Yep.
Again, folks, the Bible, its terminology is extremely clear. Yes, sir. Intercourse. Yep. I don't want to write that much. Okay. Lust for sex. Lust for intercourse with someone other than your spouse. And I will add here, it could also be spouses. Right? We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Okay? So, when you're looking at a pretty girl walking down the street, what the Bible is saying is that if you're looking at that pretty girl walking down the street and you think to yourself, I wonder what she looks like without that dress on. Does that fit the biblical definition of lust? No. However, we're not made that way, are we? Men in particular, or women either for that matter. How often is it that that's where the thinking stops? Okay? Anybody who answers, I won't assume you're answering for yourself. Okay? But I think we know, don't we, that in the vast majority of cases, that's not where the thinking stops. The thinking may say, I'd like to see her without her top on, but really what you're thinking is, I'd like to see her without her top on and a bottom on, and I'd like to crawl into bed with her. Okay? Again, or him, as the case may be. So I'm not going to stand here and say that we can divide our thoughts like that. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. That's not the point. But I just want you to understand what the Bible's point is. Okay? All right? And then I'll say adultery means lust for or actual. Okay? Or actual. Meeting up with your secretary behind the filing cabinets for a quick smooch or even a bit of necking doesn't fit. If you're the wife and you come to me and you say, the security camera caught my husband in the stairwell with Mrs. Jones necking it up like crazy, and I want a divorce, I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry. That's not biblical adultery. You guys are going to have to work that out, and I'll make an appointment for you. Okay? Or the other way around. Right? Yes, ma'am?
But there was lust.
Yeah, that's right. There was lust. But in every case where the term adultery is used in reference to divorce, it is always means actual penetration. We're not talking about.
Definition is.
But we're not talking here about anything else. Let's get this right, okay? Because the same terminology is used when Paul was talking against prostitutes. And the world back then was no different than the world today. Okay, you're not going to pay $50 for a smooch. Okay, you're not going to pay $50 for 10 minutes of necking. Sorry, that's just not the way that the world works. That's just not it. Right? Now there is some question. I will grant you, there is some question in theologians today, among theologians today, whether oral sex or anal sex fits into this category. There are a lot of theologians and pastors who say, nope, it has to be regular sexual intercourse. Other pastors are saying any kind of penetration is the same thing, which would make French kissing liable for divorce. Which, in every pastor I've ever talked to about this, who says that other kinds of penetration are adultery, when I ask them about French kissing, then they say, oh, no, that doesn't meet the standard. I don't know. Why doesn't that meet the standard? And petting, and I'm assuming most of the adults in here know the difference. Petting does meet the standard or oral sex meets the standard where French kissing does not. I'm sorry, you're going to have to prove that to me from the Bible. And so, as far as I am concerned, I stick with the actual act of sexual intercourse, and stick with it. Because, again, every case that I know of in the Bible, that's what the Bible is talking about, okay? Now, it can be, I know, it can be a sticky situation, and there's probably a lot of husbands and wives out there who would say, I don't know if I can take them back, or I don't know if I can handle that if I know they've done X, Y, or Z. I sympathize with you, I really do. Remember, we're dealing with life under the fall here, and we're sometimes going to make maybe distinctions that are not biblical. Yes, go ahead.
I think where Hannah's struggling is the same place I was struggling last week was, or the last time we met. You're talking about the overall definition of adultery could include all of this stuff.
Right.
As far as a grounds for divorce, it's very specific.
Right. That's the difference. That's the difference. As far as general sin, yes, Hannah, you're exactly right. Kissing another woman you're not married to, that's wrong. That's sinful. Okay? But it's not grounds for divorce. Okay? The grounds for divorce are very clear. We'll talk about them in a minute. We haven't got there. Again, we're jumping ahead a little bit. I think Carol was first.
Well, desertion is also considered
Right.
a ground for divorce, and in my view, if you're kissing another woman or another man or doing whatever, that's a form of desertion from your spouse, isn't it?
Yep.
I mean, that to me, that you're deserting your spouse and you're with someone else.
Yes and no. Okay, yes and no. I can see that in a very humanistic sense. But when we get down to talking about divorce, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth question, when we get to the fifth question, we're going to go into this a little bit more. Desertion has two, just like adultery, desertion has a very narrow meaning when it comes to divorce. Yes, ma'am.
This adultery, it is just concerning people who are married. Unmarried people who don't count divorce as adultery?
No, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm very glad you brought that up. Future spouse. When I teach confirmation class, catechism class, we come to the sixth commandment. We go into extremely fine detail, methods of contraception and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I tell the kids, I have a general rule: don't do anything with your date that you would not want somebody doing with your future wife or husband. Or even just leave future out. So you're unmarried, the guy or girl you're going out with is unmarried, you're in the backseat of the car to drive in, maybe driving as well. And things take their normal course, which, by the way, I hadn't mentioned it, but God created it. Okay, God created the desire and all that, so it is a natural course. And people will ask, well, okay, we're not going to go all the way. What can we do? Well, one thing I'm not going to do is give you a list. First base is fine, second base is okay, third base, no, that's out of the question, etc., etc. Okay, and by the way, we do run the kids too, so they understand what that terminology means. But anyway, no, I'm not going to give you this. I'm just going to give you the general rule. Don't do anything with your date that you wouldn't want somebody doing to your spouse. Okay? So if you wouldn't want somebody tonguing your spouse, don't tongue your date. Okay? Simple as that. Now, of course, the kids will whine and cry and complain to me. Oh, gee, that pretty much cuts out everything. Hey, I'm just telling you what my advice is, and based on what I know from Scripture and such, and that's all. At least James was first. Back to you.
It's actually Lorraine from our mind asking, what about thought, word, or deed?
Okay, those, if they're lustful, those are sins. No question about it. However, they are not grounds for divorce. There certainly be grounds for maybe some marriage counseling, or certainly discussion, if nothing else. But if you come to me and say, my husband has been looking at pornography, or my husband has been telling me his sexual fantasies, dreams, or my husband tells me that he lusts after our neighbor when she's out at the pool, maybe without a bathing suit or whatever. I'm going to tell her, I'm sorry, hon Mayor, sorry, Susie, I can't. Now, you can find a lawyer and a judge, I'm sure, that'll be more than happy to split the up. But I can't give you permission, quote unquote, from God based on money. I can't do that. As bad as you might be. Yes, ma'am.
So, even if it's not grounds for divorce, it's still under the definition of adultery?
Can be. It can be, yes. It can be. Now, again, what's happening today is that pastors are granting divorces in the church, not doing any discipline, not doing any patching up or attempts to patch up, based on pornography and based on oogling, if you want to call it that, and based on many things much less than our biblical definition of adultery. And I find that reprehensible. I find that deplorable. And it is getting out of hand. Women are coming to their pastors, and in some cases, pastors' wives are coming to other pastors at first before they talk to their husbands, and maybe they found an image on the phone or a laptop or something they didn't like, or that made them puke or whatever. These guys are getting divorced and getting taking their children taken away from them and everything with no recourse. And it is just simply wrong. It is not biblical to do that. Granted, there's a deep problem there, or might be a deep problem. Sometimes it's not as deep as you think, but in any case, there's certainly a problem there. It needs to be dealt with, and it should be dealt with. But this willy-nilly, that's enough, in a divorce, no. That's not what God's Word teaches. Yes, ma'am?
Okay, so then what if like all of your counseling doesn't work and the problem resolved? All of my mother's do you?
Well, let's not get into personal cases, sweetheart. I could tell you some things there that not even you know. Not even her parents know. You don't want to go there. I know. So don't go there, okay?
But like, even like.
Okay, good question. This is a good question. And again, we're shooting past polygamy right to divorce. That's okay. Good question. I have two responses to that. One is, I'm sorry. That's really too bad. That's very unfortunate. It's not good to have an unloving relationship. And then my second answer is, God says stick it out. That's what God says. And again, folks, I'm hamstrung here, okay? I took a vow when I became your pastor, when I became a pastor, took a vow to preach and teach and practice according to God's Word, period. Nothing else. So again, unless you can find me a passage somewhere that says, well, if things don't work out, then you go your separate ways. I don't know of any such passage. Even in the apocryphal literature. I don't know of any such passage in any spiritual literature the first 300 years of Christianity. 600 years of Christianity. I've never run across anything like that. You gotta understand, folks. Divorce was almost the unforgivable sin in the early church. I mean, it was tough. And especially in the Middle Ages, if you didn't get the church's permission, which basically is an annulment rather than divorce, and it's a whole other subject. But in any case, if you didn't get the church's permission, you were excommunicated on the spot. You were immediately designated to hell.
There were some Roman churches still in the 1900 anything that had that happen.
Oh yeah. Well, pretty much up to Vatican II. Pretty much up to 1962. That was still the official policy. Even though in the United States, divorces had gotten a lot easier by that time. still not easy at all. So, I mean, the climate that we're dealing with now, where it's, Jane, this just ain't working out. Yeah, Robert, you're right. Let's go down to the bookstore and pick up a little packet, and we'll sit down and fill out the packet. I get the motorcycle, and you get the car, and I get the house, and you get the whatever, the cottage, whatever, and I'll take the boys, and you take the girls, or whatever. And the way that it's going about today, it is not even close to being biblical at all. But it's been going on now, and this no fault divorce has been going on now for so long, 30, 40 years, maybe even longer in some states, that you have to understand what we're dealing with, and Hannah is no exception. And that's all she has ever known. That's all many of us have, or our younger family members. That's all we have ever known. Is that, okay, bye, see ya, didn't work out, better luck next time, thanks for the memories. Love that song. But, yes?
Lorraine again says, marriage has been too easy to obtain without knowledge of what commitment it is.
Both are true. It has been way too easy to do, and it has been way too easy to undo. That's true, yes, that's true. I will grant you that. But again, the state stuck its nasty little nose when the government became in charge of this. That's mainly when the problems got worse in a lot of ways. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Say one thing that's heard a lot. Just the act of kissing one another. When I was brought up, I was told this was the second. The very next step was second.
Right, right.
No question about it. Right. And now it is used, especially by these stars that go around. I think they kiss all over. There is a big problem, and they're also involved. Another person.
Yeah, and here again, if you look at some of the more legalistic religious groups, it is clear that they have in mind, that's what they have in mind, the Mennonites and such, you can't hold hands. We remember, all of us, I'm sure, remember our favorite movie, The Quiet Man, and Michelin. Yeah, no patchy fingers. And, then there's the holding hands, and then there's the going on walks, and then there's the hay rides, and then there's the shopping, whatever that was, whatever. And then there was, as this thing took on, a year or more, and who was it? The crazy American, right? Nah, none of that. And so, yeah, and so this is the way, the Americans always have had a very deleterious effect on the morals of the world. Okay? This even goes back, I'm sure some of you know a little bit of the history of spooning, okay, and stuff like that. And again, the beginnings of those things were very, I would say, innocent, but they got out of hand. And you had a whole lot of unwed pregnancies, and you had a whole lot of shotgun weddings, and you had a whole lot of other problems that came from stuff like that. And so even if they started these things innocently enough, they became known, and then pretty soon the whole world was going at it. So, let's go on to polygamy. What does God say about polygamy? You will notice that I did not have any passages up there about one man and one woman for a reason. What does God say about polygamy? Absolutely nothing. Yeah. God says absolutely nothing, except one little passage in Deuteronomy, in the law, where it says if you have more than one wife, you have to treat them equal. That's it.
There's one other place.
Is there another place?
Yeah, on qualifications for being a...
Yes, you're right. yes, for a New Testament, for being a New Testament pastor, yes, only have one wife. And again, most of the commentators are assured that the only reason for that is because if Paul says you can be a better pastor with no wives than one wife, then obviously 2 wives is going to make it impossible for you to do your duty. That's why it's in there. It has nothing to do with morals or ethics. It has to do simply with you don't have time. Okay? Especially if you're keeping the companionship and the children options always on the table and functioning as you're supposed to with your duty, okay? And as you get up into 5 and 6 and 7 wives, good luck with that. Okay? Guys think sometimes this is kind of a paradise or whatever. They quickly, the ones who do, the polygamists in the Mormon community and such, they quickly find out that this is a lot of hard work. And not just the sexual part, the companionship part too. You know, they all demand, hey, you got to watch this TV program with me. No, you got to watch it with me. You know, we got Hallmark movies lined up on all the TVs, you know, for the whole rest of the night. Good luck. When are you supposed to sleep? And that's not even counting the children part. That's just counting the companionship part. So good luck with it. Yeah. I think it's clear. I think it's clear from God's silence that you know, he's not overly concerned about the problem. I think it regulates itself. But he just has very little to say. Now, having said that, his preference, obviously, again, going back to the original creation, his preference is very clearly one man, one woman. That's God's original institution. And so when pastors or churches, theologians, whatever, talk about it today, this is what we always go back to. We always say, yeah, this is true. But what did Jesus say in this relationship? He was talking about divorce, but it applies to polygamy too. He said, because of the hardness of your heart. In other words, because sometimes you just, you have a real problem following through on this stuff, then Paul's admonition comes in, it's better to marry than to burn. Well, I won't be surprised when polygamy is the law of the land. I won't be surprised. I will be surprised if it is taken up by very many people. I don't think it will. I really don't. I don't think it will be the disaster that the anti-Mormons and anti-polygamists say it will be. I really don't, because I think common sense will prevail. And as again, most men have almost an impossible time just keeping one woman happy. Try 4 or 5 or 6. Good luck with that. I don't think that it's just not beyond. It's not within our capability. Anything else on polygamy? Yeah.
So like, what if you keep them all unhappy?
Well, then he needs counseling of a whole different kind. Yes. Yeah, right.
I don't think he'd be around long.
All right. What is God's view of divorce? God's view of divorce is, again, going back to what we've been talking about. This shouldn't take very long now. We're pretty through it already. Okay. 2 reasons and 2 reasons only. Okay. And again, this is not necessarily in any kind of order. I'm sure that's what you have after dinner, but whatever. It's not more to do it. Now, what does desertion mean? Okay? It used to be back in the old days. Okay, back in the days when before there was no fault divorce, this was called malicious. And what did the government mean by malicious? They meant what the Bible meant, and they meant what the early church meant, which is 2 aspects of it. Okay? That it's, I think I heard somebody say physical
And emotional.
Well, I'm coming to that. And permanent or seeming to be permanent. Okay. And I have a great example. This was a pastor, a classmate of mine. He was a pastor in North Dakota. That was his first call out of the seminary. And I never was convinced the guy really had his heart in the ministry. And after 4 or 5 years, he literally disappeared. Literally. He went out, said he was going to make some calls, and never came back. Period. Just kept writing. And it was many years before we discovered what happened to him. He had left, and he went to Alaska. He went to Vancouver and signed on a tramp steamer, and spent the next few years going inside what's called the Inner Passage, back and forth to Juneau and I guess Anchorage, and back and forth. And was a crew member on this, but changed his name, which you could kind of do that a little easier. It was before internet and all that kind of stuff. We're talking early 80s. And he meant to stay away forever. He was discovered. His ship went further south than usual one time, down to San Francisco, and another classmate of ours happened to be a pastor in that area, and actually ran into the guy by the docks down in the Fisherman's Wharf kind of area. Ran into him and heard his whole sad tale, and convinced him, you really need to tell your wife that you're alive. And he had a couple kids by that time, and so you need to tell your family members you're alive. And he didn't want to, but he finally did. Now, on her part, after I think the second or third year, I forget which one it was. I think it was more than 2, but I don't know if it was 3. She divorced him for desertion. Right? Which, and nobody had any gripe with it. So that's what the original intended meaning was originally. Is that you physically relocate, you keep yourself physically apart. Also, you need to know that in the church, especially in the Middle Ages, if you said to your wife, for example, I don't want to have sex with you anymore, right? You're too ugly, you're too old, you're too fat, you're too whatever, she actually had the right in the Middle Ages. This is one of the few powers that a woman had. A woman could go to her priest and say, my husband refuses to have sex with me, and he could be the one put under church discipline. So it was very interesting. Of course, we hear about it more the other way. The woman's always got a headache and all, whatever. Okay. But that was also included in this. So in other words, you could be in the same house, you could still bring home the bacon, you could still provide for roof and the food, you could still provide everything else. And if you didn't provide that, the church would consider that as desertion. Now today, of course, that's no longer the case, but it was. And so that was what's included in malicious desertion. Now today, we have included a bunch of other things. Okay? We have included abuse of a physical and or mental and or emotional kind. Okay? So abuse is certainly included today, and it does include the emotions and mental, not just knocking them around, but all three. Okay. So abuse has been added to the desertion. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So that's for like the wife, right?
It's for both.
Oh yeah. So
It's for both.
the spouses.
Yeah.
So what if one of those spouses commit abuse to the children? Is that still?
What?
Like, what if the spouse abuses the child? Like
Oh,
children?
well, that's kind of a whole different ball of wax. All right, that's illegal. Yeah, that's illegal. Now,
Grounds for divorce.
is it grounds for divorce?
Biblically.
I would handle it, and I have thought of it this way: that, and I've not had a case that I could think back on where it's the wife. No, there was one. Yeah, there was. I did have a case where a wife was physically abusive to the children, and this was then emotionally and mentally abusive to the husband. or the other way around, obviously, would hold. So, yeah, if a parent abuses their children, this is often, again, normal situation, this is often very mentally and emotionally abusive to the other spouse. So I would say that would fit the definition that we use today. I don't know that, I'm not going to be able to find a Bible passage for it because that's not covered. But I would certainly say that because of the emotional and mental stress that is put on if a spouse has to watch the other spouse, and I would even include this. I would even include not just to watch the spouse hit the children without mutual commission ideas here, but also belittle them, make fun of them. We know today the damage that can be done by an overbearing parent, husband or wife, mother or father, who constantly ranks down their kids and stuff like that. We know that is actual damage. So I would include that too. So when I get into a situation where children are involved and one spouse is accusing the other spouse of harming them in some way, I try to get the details and find out exactly what's going on. And in a couple of cases I can think of in the past, in my ministry anyway, it was pretty easy. When I said I need to talk to the husband and wife separately, and I said to the husband, they had the two kids, the four of them were there, actually in this building. And I said, now you two kids, you wait with your father in here while I talk to your mother. No, we don't want to. They were scared to death. I said, well, okay, let me talk to the father first. Okay, that's fine. There's no problem. So obviously, that told me a ton right there. That answered a lot of the questions right there. And so, yeah. Okay, let's move on. What does God ask of people while they are not married? Now, I think we already talked about this. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's, don't treat that person that you're going out with any different than, or don't treat them in such a way that you wouldn't do anything with them that you wouldn't want somebody doing to future husband or wife of yours. And I think that's a very biblical approach. Again, it's calling sometimes a little bit for a judgment call. And the Bible does not give lists of do's and don'ts. You can do this, but you can't do that. I think too here, maturity, life experience come into play a little bit. And it's good to know a little bit who you're dealing with too. Blind dates sometimes don't wind up very good. Other times they do. Just depends. What kinds of behavior does God consider indecent and immoral? Well, I think it's the same answer, but maybe a little bit more specific. But certainly, this we've talked about, but we probably should reiterate it a little bit. Nudity is a funny thing in the Bible. It's a very odd thing. You can find examples of nudity that are extremely, I would say, maybe you would use the word natural or commonplace, and there's no bones, nothing made of it. Nobody screams and yells and carries on. On the other hand, there are many laws in the Levitical laws of Moses, against nudity of various kinds. If you look at them, one thing is in common with all of them. Anybody? What is the common thread that runs through all of the anti-nudity laws, if you want to call them that, in the Old Testament, in Moses' law especially? What's the one thread that runs through them? It's really kind of interesting. Relations. Don't look upon the nudity of your brother's wife. Don't look on the nudity of your mother's sister. Don't look on the nudity of your father's brother. Don't look on the nudity of your nephew. Don't look on the nudity of your niece. Or these, longer terms. But nothing is said about looking on the nudity of anybody else. And we know from history, we know that common baths were the norm. And we know that whole villages would go down to the river for baths without any problem. We've got examples of this where soldiers and the camp followers, the women camp followers, go down into the brook to bathe and take off their clothes. It says that very clearly. Take off their clothes and lay them on the bank because they had to rush and get their swords in case they were attacked. So nudity was a part of life. As I've said, here was your typical home up until the 1900s. Okay, let's make it 1800s, I guess. But up until about the 1800s, this was your typical home, front door, window, and that's about it. And maybe one corner you had the fire burning, okay, and let's say this corner was the mom and dad's bedroom, but there was no, all there was a bed. And then the kids slept over here on hammocks or on something, and maybe here was underneath the window was the sink, and you got fetched water in and everything else. But everything that you could imagine, including making the next generation of family, was all done in the same building. And this was not, nobody even gave it a second thought. Well, a first thought for that matter. Nobody cared. It was no big deal. Everybody already knew what everything looked like. I mean, good grief. The whole concept of privacy was unknown in the world until the last 200 years. 150. Think about that. Any concept of privacy. I mean, most of the toilet facilities, especially in Europe, were public and open. That's just the way it was. And to this day, if you go to Germany or France or a number of other places, don't be shocked and surprised when you walk out onto the beach and you see things just hanging out. Again, that's the way it's been for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And I don't care. So, when we're talking immoral and indecent, we have to keep the biblical framework in mind. And the biblical framework was, in the normal course of life, this is going to be a thing. But when the Levitical law is talking about looking upon one another, this is having to do again with sex. This is having to do again with lust. This is having to do again with illicit sexual relations. And the context, you can tell by the context, you can tell by a lot of the grammar in there. Jack just found an interesting point on this. The translations at one point don't know what to do with a word called peor. And peor basically means sacrifice it means a sexual sacrifice to a pagan god, to an idol. And again, it means sexual intercourse. And since the idol is non-existent, obviously, then you're having that intercourse with the priest and or priestess, as the case may be. And the Bible translations have all shied away from saying that. For whatever reason. They just said they're not going to do that. And Jack discovered, Pastor Cashone discovered, oh, that's what it clearly says. It clearly says having sex with the idols, which meant the idols, temple prostitutes. So there's a case where the translations have failed us in many cases because they're being too modest. They're trying to hide things from our eyes when the reality would probably teach us a lot more. So what is, again, I can't give you a list of do's and don'ts. I can say that, again, if you go to the Sistine Chapel and you see all the nudity that's there, a person would say that's art. You find a Playboy under your son's bed, that's pornography. It's the same body. It's the same body parts being shown. If you go to Italy and look at the museums in Italy and see various statues, a lot of the statues are naked, and all of the sexual organs are out. The ones that can be out are out, and clearly seen. And nobody makes it sure. Nobody says anything about it. But again, in a different context, then it's immoral and indecent. Why? Because that is the stricture that we have put on it as a culture and as a society. And I would guess God would do the same thing in every instance, again, where he's talking about lust and adultery. It has to do with illicit sexual relations. So that's really the key. And to answer the question, that's what you would say. If it pertains to illicit sex, then yes, it's indecent and immoral. If it doesn't pertain to illicit sex, if it's just the statue of David in all of his glory in the Vatican or wherever it is, I don't know where it is, then it's not. Okay, we gotta move on. Why is being chaste so difficult in our day and age? Exposure. Yes.
Could you define chaste for the younger?
Chaste. Chaste means only or confining your sexual desires and actions to your legitimate spouse. If you have one. And if you don't have one, just confining them, period. Okay? You confine them until you have one, and then you don't have to confine them anymore except for that person. So, why is chaste being? Harry said exposure. I like that. Nice pun.
Our society in general, how it's become.
Yeah, I think we've become blasé. Interestingly enough, not blasé enough to not care, which is weird. Here our society makes more of sexuality than anything else. And we have much more of a problem. If you go over to Europe, once again, because sexuality is so natural and normal, if you want to call it that, rapes are very low in Europe. Almost unheard of. They just don't happen. At nearly even close to the rate they have in the United States. Sexual crimes in general, sexual abuse, sexual use of children, you name it. Any of that stuff is far lower in other parts of the world. And frankly, I think it's because it's blasé. They don't make a big deal of it. We, on the other hand, keep it under cover, so to speak, and yet at the same time, we have tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of problems. It's a weird juxtaposition. It's a weird commentary, I think, on our brains. Yeah.
You go over to Japan, I walk up and down the streets of Tokyo, and you see people dressed nice. Well, but if you go to a public bath,
right,
there is no privacy.
No, none.
Men, women, child, old, young, middle age, it doesn't matter what.
They again.
You get back out in the street.
It is part of their culture. It's just part of their life, and again, in Japan, rape is almost unknown, almost completely unknown. I mean, the incidences are few and far between. But that's also true of murder, and that's also true of violence. So, Mike, you have a point?
The other thing is our illustrious media, especially Hollywood, has changed what is natural, normal, and right.
Right. And
They're
that's certainly.
saying, oh, it's okay to do this and it's okay to do that, and they broadcast it in movies to show them.
They have removed all the barriers, and so people are confused, frankly.
Right.
They don't know what is right and wrong. Right. What can be done about this problem? Most of the experts in the field say that the best thing that can be done to solve this problem is to legalize prostitution. This would, according to them, this would eliminate half, if not more, of rapes. I don't agree with that for obvious reasons, but I also don't agree with it from a practical standpoint. If you know, of course, there are a couple of counties in Nevada that have legalized prostitution. To make use of one of these places is extremely, difficult because you have to drive, in many cases, 150 to 200 miles from Las Vegas, because Clark County does not permit legal prostitution. Secondly, it's incredibly expensive. And a lot of the people who are convicted of rape in our society are not rich. They're not rich people. They are, in many cases, poor people, and sometimes extremely sick. So I'm not sure that prostitution is the answer as far as that goes. It may seem like the answer, but there's all kinds of other problems that come along with that. I mean, they talk about, okay, well, we'll make sure that the men and women in the brothel are well cared for, they're healthy, they don't have any diseases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe we'll even put price controls on, okay? And so we put price controls on so make it more affordable for people. I think that by making this a government-approved financial transaction, you're dehumanizing. And I think you're going to find that the problems are going to be different problems, but they're going to be, in many cases, worse problems. Yes, ma'am.
I thought that I heard the experts say that rape really isn't about sex, it's about power.
Yeah, I've heard that too, and I've read that many, many times in all kinds of journals. I'm not so sure that's true. I think in a lot of cases it's probably true for various reasons, but I have a hard time accepting that as a general overall rule. If you're mad at somebody, there's all kinds of ways you can take it out of you. But I'm not an expert, and so I differ on that. How does God want us to understand sexual identity? Male and female created He them. Right? In the beginning, God made man and woman. Yes, very much so. So, as far as God's Word is concerned, as far as the Bible is concerned, He wants us to understand men are men, women are women, and never the twain shall meet. As far as becoming one or the other. Yes?
Where this gets distorted is, I've heard it so many times, even from family. Well, God loves everyone, so they're going to love them no matter what they do.
Well, that's true in a very...
And He does love everyone.
Sure, in a very general sense, that's true. But, however, he certainly has still set down guidelines and set down rules and set down what is true and what is false. And God likes the truth. God loves the truth. And He hates a lie. And Bruce Jenner is a walking lie. Right? Yeah. That's what he is. And so God may love Bruce Jenner.
Chastity. Or what is
I don't
it?
even
Calls himself.
Chad. God loves Bruce Jenner. No question about it. Jesus died for Bruce Jenner. But God hates the lie that he's living. No question about it. And does not approve one little bit of the lie that he's living. Or anyone else, for that matter. In this case, I did point out to you last time, because we got short there too. The section in the Catechism, starting on page 102, I already did that, so I'm not going to do it now. But I pointed that out, and all of the things about sexual identity and so on and so forth. Bookmark that, dog ear that, whatever. It's a handy reference. 102 to the end of that section. That will really help you and keep you clear on this point. One thing I did not talk about a little bit, and that's, find that on page 98 and 99 in your catechisms. Question 71 and 72. And this is a sore spot with a lot of pastors. And I understand why, but I think they're looking at it from a little bit of a uneducated or ignorant position. What does the Bible affirm about people who are not married? Well, not married according to whom is the question. And the next question, same way. What's the Christian view of living together apart from marriage, cohabitation? Again, according to whom? Go back to our original definition. If their answers here are to be put into practice 100%, then a lot of us would not be here. Because our ancestors, in many cases, would not be able to be married as far as paper, as far as the government, as far as legal means, as far as judges or pastors or churches or anything. And I'm not just talking about 100 years ago. I'm talking about 1,000 years ago. Okay? Let's understand, folks, that in many cases, matter of fact, the majority of cases, you were lucky. If you were a serf or a peasant, you were lucky if you could get someone to marry you. Almost the vast majority of people, especially during the years of the Black Plague, where ministers, judges, pastors, and everybody else were dropping over dead. There are a lot of people who just cohabitated because there was no other thing to do. That's just what they did. Now, what did they do?
They agreed as a family and tied the knots.
They agreed as a man and a woman to look upon each other as husband and wife until death parts them. That is the biblical and the only biblical definition for marriage. And I'll give you a really good example of how messed up our society is. In the state of Arizona, they have two conflicting laws. Right? Well, more than two. On this topic, they have. At least. On the one hand, they have completely eliminated all laws against cohabitation. Right? There is no law on the books in Arizona against cohabitation. Either month-long, lifelong, week-long, or hour-long. You can get a hotel on Miracle Mile for an hour, and you can say, you can sign in as Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and you can say whatever you want to say, and you can be quote-unquote married, or not married, and there's no law against it. There is no law against it. As long as money doesn't change hands, and as long as the two of you are either both over 18 or both under 18, yeah, that shut your ears. If you're both under 18, no law is broken. If you're both over 18, no law is broken. If one is over and one is under, all kinds of laws are broken. But other than that, no law. So there's no law at all. The pastor can't knock on your door. You're in an apartment with Mary and John are in an apartment down here down the steps, and they're living together. I can't go to their door, knock on their door, and say, "Hey, I understand you guys are living together." They say, "Yeah, that's against the law. You're breaking Romans 13."
No.
I can't do that. It's not against the law. Okay? But get this. On the other hand, another whole section of the code, someplace else, not about crime or sex crimes or anything else, but the section on marriage says, if you wish to be recognized as married in the state of Arizona, you must obtain a license from the county clerk in the county in which you reside. Wait a minute, you just said it was okay if we cohabitate. Yeah, it's fine if you cohabitate,
When you say you're married.
but don't say you're married.
There's contractual law involved.
There's all kinds of stuff. Yeah, it's crazy. I tell people all the time, I say, go to Texas, see their laws. Their laws are weird. You go to Texas, go across the border to El Paso, check into the Motel 6 and sign in as Mr. and Mrs. Smith. You're married in the eyes of the state. And she gets half of everything you owe, buddy, whether you like it or not. So this section is meant, of course, to cut down on, if not eliminate, cohabitation. But I can tell you that as far as the Bible is concerned, really, as far as the practice of the church is concerned over the last 2,000 years, these questions are a bit legalistic. The answer is that it is a little bit legalistic. I'm not going to say they don't apply in any situation, they do, but don't be so quick. You can't be so quick in just labeling everybody who's shacking up as living in sin, because in a lot of cases that is not true. So remember that. Okay. We have reached our hour without getting to the seventh commandment. Big surprise. So we'll try and finish up the commandments next time. Really, 7, 8, 9, 10 don't really take a lot of time. And they shouldn't anyway. So